My name is John Pasfield, and the title of this reading will be John and Mother Goose, Video 19, The Planning Notebook. Now, here's my novella, John and Mother Goose, A Carnival of Tales, but I'm not going to read from the novella in this reading. I'm going to read from the planning notebook. So, I wrote this while I was working my way through the writing process for the novella. So here is the planning notebook. It's a manuscript. It's held together with elastics. This is the cover. The cover has strange colors and so on. It's going to be, the planning notebook is going to lead to the novel or novella. That's why the colors and sometimes the figures are distorted, but eventually it will all come clear. So this is the planning notebook. It's on my website. You can access it, put it on your screen by clicking on the cover icon at johnpasfield.ca. Now, the planning notebook is 36,000 words long, and it was written over a span of 7 months. It's available for free, as I just said, on my website, johnpasfield.ca. Now, I'm going to read 5 passages, which I've reprinted so I don't have to take the elastics off and have it all fall apart. So I reprinted 5 passages. Before I do that, though, in these notes, I refer to books that I've already written, because when you're planning a new book, you're drawing on forms, ideas, concepts from previous books, and you're going to explore them, move them forward in your next book. So I'll just, to avoid confusion later where I'm fishing around for a book to hold up, I'll just hold all the books up that I'm going to refer to, okay? So John and Dickens, A Christmas Mystery, has already been published, and I drew on it for the planning of this book. Eleonora Duse, Let Me Have My Wings, a novel by John Pasfield, again, already published, drawing on concepts in that book. Pauline Johnson, Know Who I Am, a novel by John Pasfield, again, a pre-written book, a book I'm drawing on in order to develop the ideas and the concerns. And then another one, this one is not yet published, so it's held together with elastics, but it's with my publisher waiting to be published. It's John and Lewis Carroll, Wonderfall. So just as I meet Dickens in the other one, I meet Lewis Carroll in this one, interact with the characters of Alice in Wonderland and so on. But all of those books had ideas, concepts that I wanted to move forward as I was planning John and Mother Goose. Okay. Here's number 1 then. There are 5 passages. Here's the first passage. I enjoyed writing the Dickens rehearsals in John and Dickens and the Alice character stories in John and Lewis Carroll. The idea here is that I visit and interview many of the iconic mythical characters of the world heritage, and each has a story to tell me. I have to be careful. I wanted to continue the writing of imagery, such as I did for my Pauline Johnson novel, which I just held up, and wondered whether the idea of an Eleonora Duse novel was going to lead to a pale imitation of the Pauline Johnson novel. So you want to do something similar. Well, what if it's exactly similar? You've just repeated yourself. Well, it didn't happen. The Eleonora Duse novel is quite a good one and an interesting one, and a development of those ideas on its own. Then I say I might develop this idea of Mother Goose and I might not. What's missing here, here's the flaw so far, is the dramatic surround of the stories, as provided by the what is he thinking intrigue of Dickens and Lewis Carroll and the Gnat. So the Gnat is a character in Lewis Carroll. John has to figure out what's going on. What's Dickens thinking? What's Lewis Carroll thinking? What's this character, the Gnat, thinking? And I had nothing like that for the Mother Goose novella. So maybe it wouldn't be all that dynamic. Perhaps if someone accompanies John, another character perhaps, someone who wants to upset the apple cart. So here's the search for a negative force. A human agent? A negative icon? We shall see. Someone who wants to undermine the optimism of the human race. Someone who becomes disappointed that the stories are not darker, more pessimistic, more iconoclastic. We shall see. So somebody in the story who doesn't like nursery rhymes. They're too nicey-nicey maybe. Okay, number 2, more ideas. John's a detective. He's scheduled to be both attorneys, the judge and the jury, and the executioner. This sounds like Lewis Carroll, of course. Should his services be needed, but first his task is to find out whether or not there's been a crime. Each person, animal, entity, whatever these characters are, he encounters will say, "Never mind where I was on the night in question. I have a story which I wish to tell." Not the story that's familiar to you. The story that story is constantly telling itself. That's the nursery rhyme. This is a story which has not happened yet. This is a story which I wish to see, to experience, to live through myself. So nursery tale characters who don't like the story they're in and have a different story they'd like John to write for them. That was coming to me. John goes to see each person, animal, fairy tale character in his or her fairy tale milieu. So I didn't have a location yet. Perhaps John's led through the experience through the novella by Mother Goose herself. Plans for a future novella is what this is. This might work out or might not, along the lines of Kafka's The Trial, but less logical. Well, that's a little joke to myself, eh? In Kafka, the main character encounters all kinds of things. The trial, he's on trial, and they don't even tell him what he's on trial for or what the evidence is. But mine's going to be even less logical than that, okay? John won't know what in the world's going on. Okay, number 3. Here's note number 3. An idea I had as I woke up this morning. Mother Goose runs a small traveling carnival. She winters each year in Sarasota, Florida. Each time she takes her troupe out, it's an eclectic group of nursery rhyme characters performing in small tents throughout North America. She's not sure whether one of her current troupe is missing or not. She's getting older, she's lost her list, and she's not sure how many nursery rhyme characters there should be on the current troupe. But she feels that one of them is missing. John is brought in by Mother Goose as she tells him to find out, as in an earlier note, whether there's been a crime committed, who's been murdered or kidnapped, when this crime occurred, and if a crime has been committed, who is guilty. So it was all shaping up. John protests occasionally that he's not really a detective at all, but he is interested in nursery rhymes, as he heard most of them when he was a boy, and occasionally dips into them now, not only because he has young grandchildren, but because he's interested in myth. What it is, how myths are created, and how they work. And nursery rhymes strike him, John, as the roots of myth. In fact, he's been reading some of them over the last few days. Well, that would be why he's daydreaming about Mother Goose. The other nursery rhyme characters claim that they have no idea how many are or should be in the troupe at present. The Mother Goose troupes are always different each time one leaves Sarasota to do a tour. Nursery rhyme characters drop in and drop out of the troupe all the time. And each one sort of lives in a world of his own, not having a lot to do with the other nursery rhyme characters. So again, the situation is coming clear. That was the third note. Here's the fourth one I picked out. Now, the original impetus for this novella, John and Mother Goose, was to continue writing the scenes that I enjoy writing, the scenes of Dickens rehearsing his Christmas Carol characters in John and Dickens, and the scenes in which the Alice characters tell John of their hopes for the third Alice novel in John and Lewis Carroll. So I suppose the question now to ask for me, John the author, is, here's the question, what is it that these nursery rhyme characters wish to tell John? So that's giving myself a challenge, eh? I'm going to have to make up all these stories. As in an earlier note, each brushes off the questions about the crime. Never mind where I was on the night in question. In fact, you seem to be asking me for the date of the night in question and telling me there might not be a night in question at all. Well, here's what I think about all the time. Here's what obsesses me as I go through my routines as the character that you know from the nursery rhyme. Don't you realize that behind every nursery rhyme there's a person? At least that's what I call myself, whether the world knows me as a person or not. I suppose most people think of me as just a character, because they only see me when I'm out on stage performing my nursery rhyme. But there's a whole world not only of action, but of thought. for me when I leave the stage. I have hopes, I have aspirations, I have joy, and heartache too. There's a whole world that I live in besides the world that I present when I'm on stage. Okay, so words of the book were coming to me. A lot of those words are in the book. 5, the last note I'm going to read. What I have to do is to take the Mother Goose nursery rhymes, which are available on the Gutenberg Project, and print them and read them and figure out where I want to go from here. Of course, I'm thinking of a novella of 10 chapters, with the first and last chapter, chapter 1 and chapter 10, being the outer frame for John. The inner story of John and Mother Goose would be 8 chapters as a standard for my novella form. And that would mean either 8 nursery rhyme characters telling their stories to John, or an introductory chapter, chapter 2, as in John and Dickens and John and Lewis Carroll, and then 7 nursery rhyme characters telling their stories to John. So getting the shape now. I think that in the back of my mind has been the question of what is the dynamic question about Mother Goose. I can't see Mother Goose just tagging along with John as he tries to interview these characters who take the opportunity to unload the baggage of their minds as if they're thinking while alone late at night or even speaking the thoughts that they normally are dreaming. There has to be something about Mother Goose that won't damage or undermine the common mythological perception of her, but that leads to an extra dimension to the novella, that lends an extra dimension to the novella. If I think about it long enough, something will turn up. Well, that's confidence. Something did turn up. Something is bothering Mother Goose. She's still the Mother Goose of the nursery rhymes, but she has problems that we don't know about till we read the John Passfield book. Okay, those are the 5 notes from the planning notebook. Here's a note that I wrote for this video presentation in reflection. In reading over these 5 separate notes, all of which were written early in the planning and writing process, I can see a common creative pattern, one that I've followed many times in the planning and writing of a fictional work. So I'm going to number them. I have dashes as I will print them in a book eventually. Number 1, the mention of earlier novels and novellas that I've written reminds me that often a new writing project comes out of elements that have pleased me in previous writing projects and that I would like to explore again, and elements that I've not managed to include in previous writing projects that I would like to include in the next one. 2 examples are the writing of imagery which pleased me for my Pauline Johnson novel, and which I looked forward to writing for my Eleonora Duse novel. So imagery, I'd like to write more imagery. And the idea that mythical characters have stories that they wish to tell, other than the stories that they've been created for, which led from the Lewis Carroll novel to my Mother Goose novella. So I'd like to write more imagery, as I did in those 2 novels. I'd like to make up more stories that characters would rather live in than the ones they're in, as in Lewis Carroll novella. Okay, here's number 2. Another element that I see in the early notes is the wish to repeat a form that worked well for me in a previous novel or novella. The example that I see here is that there's a character in my earlier books, for instance in John and Dickens and John and Lewis Carroll, whose motives are not clear to John as he moves through the plot. It seems to John that this character might want to upset the apple cart. That is, to change the trajectory of the plot that John seems to feel is the main plot of the story that he's living through. So John's living through a story, but there seems to be a character who wants to destroy that story. What's going on here? Okay, here's number 3. Another element that I see developing is what I would call a whole book concept, right? The whole large container has to be clear, so everything can go in it. One which contains 1 or 2 major elements. The example I notice here is that John will be a detective who's asked to solve a crime, but that the characters, whom I later called the mythicals, would say, never mind where I was on the night in question, and so on. That gave me, as I say, a large form which would take in the elements of the whole story. So once I had that, all I needed was 7, 8 characters maybe who would repeat that, but with different interesting stories. Okay, 4. Another element which I see in these notes is a specific situation in which the story takes place. Earlier I said he'd visit them in their own milieu, inside the milieu of their verses. Well, no, something else was even better. Came to me as I woke up one morning that Mother Goose would run a small traveling carnival, which would winter in Sarasota and set out each spring, as the carnivals used to do when I was a boy, and tour North America. Included in this would be the idea that she brings John to her carnival because she believes him to be a detective, and she would like him to solve the problem of the missing fairy tales. This concept fits inside the whole book concept of the telling of alternative tales, and led me to go ahead and plan other elements within the whole book concept. So the large package was there, the outer frame, the outer container. 5. Another element that I see in these notes is a procedural plan. I realized that the nursery rhymes were available to me in the Gutenberg project on the internet, that I could print them and look at them and decide which ones would give me nursery rhyme characters who would not only perform in their original stories on rickety stages in the Mother Goose Carnival, but would also give me scope for imagination in thinking of the stories that they would tell John that they would rather have as the stories in which they would live and act. So how do I go about this? Procedural, step by step. 6. A practical large form question whose answer is an element in these notes is as to how much John would know what's going on and how much Mother Goose would know of what's going on. By what's going on, I mean 2 basic elements. One element would be the nursery rhyme characters would be performing on stages. This is what both John and Mother Goose would know. And the other element would be that the nursery rhyme characters would have stories that they'd rather live and act in besides those into which they were put by their creators, the humans who wrote the nursery rhymes. And this John would know, and Mother Goose would not know. So that was an important question, an important answer. So it's interesting to see the various elements that would allow me to write the novella as they occurred to me. As always, one needs a large framework, which will hold all of the elements, both those already thought of and those not yet thought of together. A large framework allows me, the writer, to move forward with the confidence that I'm always making decisions for elements that will fit within the elements that I've already decided upon. There are a few small details in these first few notes that didn't make their way into the final novella, but luckily almost everything that I thought of in these first few notes fit nicely within the large framework. So I had everything in order, you might say, one inside another. Without making notes like this, I don't believe I would be able to write my novels and novellas, because the planning notes allow me to go back a few days or even a few months later and see what some of my ideas were when they first came to me. Ideas can always be adjusted and improved, but if they're forgotten, they are of no use at all. The writing of planning notebooks is my way of avoiding that dreaded menace, the blank page. Every writer fears the blank page. Planning notebooks help me to avoid it. So, lastly, John and Mother Goose, The Carnival Tales is my novella. It's on Amazon if you look there. There's more information. It's at my publisher's website, Rox Mills Press, roxmillspress.com. And it's at my website, that is to say the planning notebook's at my website. So too is the journal, which I'll do in another video, at johnpasfield.ca. And lastly, I'll just say thank you for watching this video.